Focus on the Family grew very, very quickly. It became a radio ministry, and it just multiplied to the point where Focus on the Family is listened to by almost 40 million a week. It started very small. It was Dr. Dobson and a secretary in a little office, and he wrote some books. The one that made a huge impact was called Dare to Discipline, and that book cut very much against the tenor of the times. Focus on the Family Canada was the first affiliate. Dr. Dobson was very excited about seeing that message spread to Canada.
We have had a partnership and a friendship with Canada, which has its own independent board and makes its own decisions, but we work in very close partnership, and we are very, very proud of what has happened there.
Because of the influence that Focus and Dr. Dobson had in Canada, there were a few people that came together that really felt that Canada needed its own presence.
Focus Canada started at the initiative of Jerry Scott, who was president of Word Records Canada. They formed a board then. They had a board of 5 people, and they were incorporated in December of 1982, and then March of 1983 they opened up the first office, and they had 1 person working part-time. We didn't have an office building, we had nothing. So Jerry Scott was in a building in Richmond. He invited Focus Canada to have 1 room there. We rented 1 room from him, and he donated that rent back to us, so that was the start of Focus Canada.
So as God directed, they ended up approaching Jeff and Bev Still, and Jeff was a local businessman in Vancouver, and asked Jeff, would you be the person to take and lead this? And Jeff was it's an interesting man, because he was so intuitive. He was so in touch with the Holy Spirit. His heart was, if we can make an impact in one family at a time and strengthen them and see them with materials in their hands, but more importantly, win them for Jesus, we'll make a difference in Canada.
So then in February of 1984, driving to work that one day, I said, Lord, I need to look for something full-time, but I really don't want to work full-time. I liked what I was doing, and I didn't really want to change, so make it really clear to me. That night, I had a phone call from Jerry Scott and said, would you like to come and work at Focus on the Family? I was the first full-time employee. There was 4 part-timers, and then it just eventually grew, and as we got busier and busier, we hired more people. When Focus first started, there was about 5,000 people on the mailing list at Focus US. These were Canadians who heard the broadcast. The broadcast was just heard on US border stations, but people would write in, ask for resources and whatnot. And I think it was about 1986, we aired the broadcast on the first Canadian station, and that was CKAR in Edmonton. The counseling responses we did, started doing those on our own too. We started what they called a volunteer group, and these were people that were just out in the community, and they would then, within their churches, would tell them about Focus on the Family, and then also we would Canadianize the magazine, and would be things that were of importance or of interest to Canadians. Sending out our own newsletter that was from Canada. Before it was just always from the US, and then so as we grew, these things just sort of naturally emerged.
When I came out here in August of 1995, I became the 2nd president of Focus on the Family Canada. You know, Jeff had served for a number of years, and then when he passed away, that was handed off to me. I'm highly relational. I want to build genuine relationships. I wanted to get to know the stories of the staff, and I wanted to get to know the stories of the key donors. Like, why were they involved with Focus? Like, what difference had had made in their lives. This was really early on. I hadn't been here very long, and said, let's do a cross-Canada tour. Let's go right from, we'll start in Charlottetown and we'll work our way back. And that was a very, very special, that was one of the great memories I had. This was my platform. And I remember doing this across the country. I said, we're not a distribution center for Focus US. Yes, we have the resources, and we'll get them to you, but that's not why we exist. We exist to be alongside of you, to help you in the trenches where you are with your families.
Well, I joined the organization when there was no president, as in staff president, in between presidents. So Bruce had left and Daryl had not yet joined, and so I was kind of in there in the in-between. And so, in all honesty, you know, every organization goes through trials and changes, and that was one of those periods where the organization was really going through a change. I think that kind of crucible of difficulty facilitated, you know, a president such as Daryl to come in, who was a change agent. And he, having had a political background, brought into the organization a revitalized kind of focus on policy issues.
It energized Daryl. His mom's Mennonite, so the pacifism wasn't there. Like he really was into the struggle of it. And Terrence was an awesome right-hand man for him walking through that. There were others involved too, for sure.
In those years, we addressed certain family issues, but then in that time frame, that same time frame while Daryl was president, marriage began to be debated within our nation and the definition of marriage. We felt a significant responsibility to be a voice in that dialogue and to let our belief and perspective on the importance of marriage, but what marriage was by God's design. We really felt a need to speak up about that.
But we tried to have a high level of relationship with politicians and political groups, just to come alongside and see what they were thinking and how we could influence their thinking with family issues particularly. So that's what led to the formation of the Institute of Family and Marriage Canada, a think tank that was based in Ottawa that was an arm of Focus on the Family in that realm.
But that was a difficult time. We faced a lot of opposition, and we always stood for, very intentionally, a pro-marriage position. But we were perceived in the media, and we were named in media not as the pro-marriage organization, but as the anti-gay organization, or against, same-sex marriages.
The definition of marriage, Daryl Reed did a lot of work to work for Focus on the Family on that, but he had left Focus on the Family, and when the law was actually passed, Terrence was president at that time.
I was elected as president in January of 2005, and then it was that same year, in July, when that legislation was brought before Parliament and ultimately adopted as a law in Canada. And so here I was, a new president, and on the plane to Ottawa to respond to the Supreme Court's decision. And I guess I was just shaking my boots, if I'm honest. I really was not, wondering what I got myself into. And my wife, talked to my wife Joyce, and she just said, listen, Moses didn't know what he was going to say, and the Lord said, I give you the words to say, and the Lord promised us that in those moments he would give us what we needed to say. And so I honestly felt the Spirit's strength in that moment. I didn't stop being nervous, but got in front of the cameras and shared what I had to say, and I really sensed that God was with me. And I think that really did have a profound impact on my presidency, to the extent that I just, in that moment, experienced what it was to lean on the Lord and have Him, be with me. And that communion with God became very treasured to me. those are the blessings that you reflect back on when you recall how intimate and how powerful that experience was, and I'm grateful for that. Yeah, very grateful for that. Before the legislation actually went to Parliament for a vote, there was a budget that was presented to the Parliament. Well, it came down to a final vote, and there was an individual who was not in the minority government who we really thought would vote against the budget, who voted for the budget. The bill passed, which meant that the marriage legislation could then be voted on, because any open legislation when a government dissolves falls off the table. Well, that was a very defining moment for me. And I just remember how I was looking through the window in our office, the TV, our whole staff, well, a number of our staff were watching this vote come down one for one. And it was just, I must admit, it was just a defining moment where how easy it would have been for you just to have changed that vote, and this marriage legislation that we had fought against for 3+ years would have fallen away, and we would have been victorious, and all glory to God, so to speak. But it didn't. I just kind of sensed the Lord saying, I've permitted this. I've allowed this legislation to be passed. What are you going to do? And I, in that moment in the days that followed, felt a remarkable conviction that Focused on the Family Canada was here in Canada for this time, that we were called and established in Canada for such a time as this, and we were to plant our roots and to establish Focus on the Family Canada as here for this nation. And so I brought that vision to the board, and I've been talking for years about whether or not we should build a building or not, and I just said, I really think we need to have an office here in Canada that demonstrates that we're committed to this nation, committed to the cause of family, that literally is a cornerstone for what God would want to build in Canada about family.
Purchasing land gave us an opportunity to have a home of our own, I suppose. We always felt like we were connected, but to have a place that was ours was pretty significant. And there was a lot of people who came alongside to make that a reality. Just as the Vancouver Olympics were coming up, there was no help available to build anything, and it seemed so far out of reach, but people stepped up and came alongside, and that building was built remarkably, and we walked in without a mortgage. It just phenomenal. And so to walk in like that and know that people believed in what Focus on the Family was doing as much as they did to make that a reality was amazing. So I love some of the pictures in the front entry of the collages of all the families. It just represents so many who benefit from Focus on the Family's ministries and who stepped up and made it happen. Having been a pastor way back when myself, seeing the Clergy Care Network established was very affirming for me. And then seeing the opportunity for the Clergy Care Network and then the retreat centers come into reality was an amazing thing to watch. So Jeff Cornelson, who was the first director of the Clergy Care Network and very instrumental in the front end of what has become Careth Creek, is remarkable. So a family in southern Alberta who had a passion to care for pastors, who had built this thing but just didn't quite have the reach, I suppose, to connect with so many pastors, asked us if we would help. And we were delighted to step into that. There was always the thought that there would be more than just a pastor's retreat. It wasn't exactly bullseye for Focus on the Family as much as we love churches and pastors, but seeing what might happen, and then when the Hope Restored program came across our paths, and it was like the light came on.
We need to be able to demonstrate that the principles that we uphold make a difference. And often we would see that over time, a long time, but this would be almost like a petri dish. We could see it transformative in a shorter period of time. And so we wanted to implement a marriage program like that. We looked south of the border, we identified this program, and long story short, that program eventually became named Hope Restored, and we started that program in Alberta. And during that period of time of that whole strategic, we ultimately were gifted property in Manitoba. We built a center there. We were doing that same Ministry Leaders Careth Retreats program there in Manitoba. And then ultimately we launched it in Ontario, not through our own center, but in partnership with the center there. There was always a sense that we should be doing more for Francophone families in Canada. If English Canada was challenged on a family front, Francophone families were, especially because they kind of preceded the cultural shift. In even Daryl's days, it was during his tenure that we sort of put our toe in the water of French ministry, but to see that then develop and grow and become a strategic part of what we did, not a big part of what we do in Canada, but a strategic complement to what we did in Canada, was significant. And I think for me, again, a real expression of God saying, you're here for this country, and that reminded us of that. When we were able to launch Kids of Integrity, that was a remarkable support for parents and children in its own kind of ministry thrust, but also both the launch of the French ministry and the Canadian-owned French magazine, and this website that was developed in Canada by Canadians for Canadians that then spread around the world literally, was a real shot in the arm for us in terms of that vision that Daryl kind of initiated and developed as we became, from an infant to a teenager to a young adult. We really were becoming more Canadian in more things that we developed ourselves. We kind of forayed sort of retreat ministry. Even before the US had retreats, we had retreats. In that whole time frame, we explored and advanced event ministry as well. We became, one of the largest event marriage events, parenting events, in the nation, doing events across the country. And so we literally were present across the country for years. And then we would promote movies, and it would be movie theaters across the country. And that, again, fulfillment of that vision, we're here for all of Canada, and that we were able to be physically present across Canada was also a real encouraging fulfillment of that vision.
Taking a different kind of message out for the date night comedy nights really brought a different flavor to people about Focus on the Family, and hearing 1,400 people or 800 people just roaring with laughter because of the comedians who love the Lord and had the gift of that really helped establish or take Focus to another kind of level of connecting with people in their community. When I was hosting the date night comedy nights, one of the pieces about Focus on the Family was just sharing the impact that the Focus's ministries had had over the previous year. And one of the lines in there was over 800 marriages saved every night after, at the intermission, there was at least one couple who would come and say, we were one of those 800. So the numbers became people. And wow, that really was awesome.
The way to make an impact is to get to the family on the ground in Canada. That's what we believe so strongly.
The work that we do, the resources that we provide, they're high quality, they're good. If people think, hey, I've got a problem, Focus is the first thing that comes to their mind, that we are just more well known. So it's a great ministry.
I really do believe that the Lord would have you here for this time. Ultimately, I think you want to find your sweet spot, but that takes a little time of where the sweet spot in my mind is where your gifting matches your role. But sometimes you have to try a bunch of things before you realize what your sweet spot is. And sometimes when you're trying new things, it can feel apprehensive, it can feel overwhelming. But lean into it. Allow the Lord to change that. He'll either affirm for you that that's what you're supposed to do, he'll show you, maybe that's something else you should do. Allow yourself to receive what God has for you. Lean into the Lord. Ask him for what you need to do your role. Ask him to help you understand your purpose in that. But also anticipate what God wants to do in your heart through this time at Focus, because I think it will not only be a blessing to you, but I think it'll be transformative for you in a very growing and powerful way for you to experience God in a new way. So lean in and enjoy.